So today we have two motherboards. Both of them are AMD motherboards, and these are quite a few generations apart. Like this was my first AMD build, but my first PC was an Intel Pentium 3, and now this one is. But I later built my own after several years, an AMD AM3. The CPU is an AM3 platform socket. That was I think it was 2012. So a lot of changes have happened, and this one we have the latest motherboard from AMD chipset. The AMD latest chipset is X470, and this one is 760G. So we'll try to see what big differences or changes have happened in these two boards across these generations, maybe 2-3 generations. So this one, let's start with the socket, this processor socket. So you can notice that both of them are pin grid array socket, which means you have the pin holes on the socket, and the pin is present, contact pin is present on the processor itself, and it hasn't changed. AMD hasn't changed the socket type. So that is so we have the pins. So we have the pins on the processor. That's the same. This is an AM3 processor. It's a Sempron. It's a Sempron processor I built with this. It's a single core processor, but it can be unlocked. AMD, the motherboards can unlock another core, making it actually an Athlon 2 X2 dual core processor. So this motherboard is from Asus, and it was very good at unlocking the other core of the Sempron processor, and I use it as a Athlon 2 X2 240, I think 240, I suppose so. But coming back to the motherboard, so we have the same type of sockets, which is a pin grid array socket, PGA, and the socket number of pins in the socket have changed, the design has changed. So this one was an AM3 socket, and this one right now, the current generation, uses an AM4 socket. So we have more pins now on the socket, and what are the changes? And we have right now, so this is the power supply for the motherboard, the VRMs. We have them here. Right now a lot of emphasis is given on cooling down the VRMs with heatsinks. So we can find heatsinks, very good heatsinks on the latest motherboard, and it also has a copper tubing based cooling. So we have a tubing here. So a lot of emphasis is given for cooling the VRMs here in the recent motherboards. We have a lot of design trends, very beautiful heatsinks here. These are metal heatsinks. This one is plastic, this one is fiber, but these two are metal. And what more changes do we have here? We have the RAM change. This one is a DDR3 RAM, and we had only 2 DIMMs. I think the maximum supported was like 16 gigabyte, and right now we have 4 DIMMs and DDR4. the and we have 4 DIMMs, that's like 64 gigabytes support. The RAM speed for DDR3 I think was 133 megahertz, and right now we have a minimum of 2400 megahertz and up to 3.2 gig 3200 megahertz. And what other change? If you look at this motherboard, we can notice we have 2 heatsinks here, this one and this one. So this is the north bridge and the south bridge. So this one basically has the graphics processing unit, and this one is the actual chipset that connects the other peripherals to the processor. So the current one does not have a north bridge. You could see that the space is virtually empty, and because the north bridge has completely moved into the processor, so we have processors. The north bridge basically had the memory controller and the graphics unit. So now in the current generation, both the memory controller and the graphics unit have been moved into the processor itself. If you take the low end or mid level, let's say the Ryzen 3 2200G and Ryzen 5 2400G, they had the graphics GPU. They are called the APU, accelerated processing unit. They have both the CPU and the GPU on the same chip. So we can see that there is no north bridge in the latest motherboards. This changed, not in this one, but this was removed quite a while back, like at least 4 years back that was removed. I think the first change was Intel, and later AMD caught up. I think it was in Sandy Bridge, Intel's, the GPU moved into the processor itself. And you could notice one more change. We have where is a parallel ATA PATA controller pin PATA port, parallel ATA port, but it also has SATA, but we had a support for PA backward compatibility for PATA. That was the period of migration from parallel to serial, so we had a PATA, essentially CD drives, CD drives mostly had that. And what else? Yeah, these heat sinks are bigger, and the other big difference is the Pci Express cards. Here we have the big change. So here we have 2 PCI slots, and this one is a PCI Express. I think that was 2.0 or 1.0. I think that was 2.0. PCI Express 2.0, and we had PCI slots. So this was the PCI basically was improved to become PCI Express with very high bandwidth. So this one is for the graphics processor, GPU card, graphics card, and the other two is for any external peripherals like a USB card or audio card, sound card. And we also had a PCI X1 here. PCI Express, and PCIe X1s. have two PCI Express slots. Obviously one of them is X16, the other one is X8, so you could connect cards in XLI, SLI or NVLink if you had an NVIDIA card. So there is no PCI slot here, it is all PCI Express slot. PCI X16, X8 and X4 and X1 slots. And right now we also have the M2 slots here. You could put the SSD, M.2 SSD or the NVMe SSD here. We could have two of them. So this one has a heatsink for the NVMe SSD. If you have a very high-end like a 970 Pro, they say that heat reduces the throughput, so maybe that helps. But yeah, that is a completely new thing. You could now have the memory data completely stored in the motherboard itself. No cables, no power supplies. That's a big change, and that's really very useful for, what to say, home theater computers or slim profiles. It's a very good welcome thing. And but basically here we are actually looking at two different motherboard sizes. This one is a micro ATX and that one is a ATX motherboard. So that's the extra slot here. We get some extra M2 and another express PCIe slot. And what other changes we have? We also have the CPU power supply has 8 pin. It's just 4 pin, 12 volt 4 pin, but right now we have 8 pin. We have 8 pins for the new motherboards. The old one had just 4 pins. Yep. And this motherboard, this is a new motherboard, has a very interesting thing. It has a USB 3.1 Gen header, front panel Type C header, or I mean it need not be Type C, but it is 3.1 Gen 2. I think it's Gen 2 header. So actually the socket looks smaller, does it? Not sure. And any other changes do I notice? Essentially the power sockets have not changed a bit. It's a 24 pin ATX power supply, has remained standard for several years, and but the power efficiency of the power supply units have increased. So maybe you could have a look at the ports. Here we have so let's look into the ports these motherboards offer. We have so the old one had PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard, a DVI port, a VGA port, USB, LAN, and multi-channel audio. So the USB was all just 2.0. We didn't have any 3.0. I think we did have, but this one doesn't have. USB 3.0 was released by then, but I doubt this motherboard has it. But the current one, we have a lot of USB ports, built-in HDMI, Type C, Gen 2, Type C and Type A ports, optical output, and of course multi-channel audio. This one has an interesting feature of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built in. So I think we did this Wi-Fi was available, but right now we have this has 5 GHz Wi-Fi, so a lot of throughputs and speed. And I think these are the few differences on the motherboard I can notice. I think one of the recent trends, the latest motherboard also has a lot of RGB lighting, and there is not. And during the previous motherboard, for the other motherboard, we never heard about anything called LEDs on the board. Because right now the trend for RGB lighting is almost limitless. RGB lighting everywhere, and this board provides you a lot of options on the board, on its design itself, and as an extra controllers. So I think I have just highlighted quite a few differences. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.